Welcome back to the Daisy Cousins Show. And now to the horrific events of this week in Amsterdam, where a pogrom perpetuated by Muslims was carried out against Jewish people after a football match. The attack was premeditated, planned on apps like Telegram and WhatsApp, and is a sorry reflection on the state of anti-Semitism in Europe and indeed in the world at the moment. And joining us to discuss this is CEO of the Israel Innovation Fund, Adam Scott Bellos. Adam, it's so fantastic to have you here to chat through these dreadful events that occurred. So tell us, this pogrom on the streets of Amsterdam, it is just frightful. Look, what went on here? What's your reaction to it?
First off, Daisy, I just want to say thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be on air with you. The word disgusting is kind of more like it. I think for the last 20 years or so, we've seen an uptick in anti-Semitic activity all over Europe. I think that the security services and the police all over Europe, including London, have not done what is necessary to curb anti-Semitic behavior, constantly excusing it as anti-Zionist sentiment or pro-Palestinian activity. The fact that it was so clearly planned and coordinated through different social channels is kind of proof of the inability of Europe to not only protect itself, but protect its culture and protect its Jews once again in the 21st century. So it's very disappointing. I think it's very alarming. I also think it's just very clear that this has been the writing on the wall for quite some time. 100 years ago, they said Jews go back to Palestine. Now they're saying, get out of Palestine, go to Europe. And this is the type of welcome that Jews would receive in Europe. This only comes down to one thing: pure and utter historical Jew hatred that has taken over Europe, for the last 2,000 years. And it's the Jewish reality. There's been reports of the police even being involved in this. So it's very disappointing. It's very disappointing. It's very frightening. But I think that if anybody has been paying attention, it's been very clear that the writing was on the wall for quite some time when it came to Europe and its Jews.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the case. It's just an absolutely awful sequence of events. And you mentioned law enforcement, possibly if some of them even being involved. Do you think that law enforcement's handling of this specific situation in Amsterdam was satisfactory?
I think it was below satisfactory. I think that anybody that thinks that any type of situation, how do I explain this? From what I understand, this is one of the largest coordinated police offensives in like Amsterdam's history or something like that. Like there was a significant amount of police for this specific event already out. So if you really think about it, this is a complete failure of their security system. Their security services. The King of the Netherlands said we failed the Jews in the Holocaust, and we failed the Jews the other day. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was yesterday or today, whatever he said. And there are stories coming out now of Jews being beaten by the police and being taken into police cars where they found Free Palestine stickers in the cars. So, if you really think about how Jew hatred works, and how anti-Semitism permeated all different levels of society 100 years ago, there's no reason to think that that is not the case now. And clearly, Israel has become such a sensitive topic. It's discussed globally now, given the multi-front war that it is involved in. And I think that to realistically think that the police will protect the Jews of Europe again is a very naive thought.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. I mean, I'm just staggered by it. Totally. Now, look, on the subject of anti-Semitism, particularly this anti-Semitism, it really does, I think, go back to radical Islam. It goes back to that ideology, which makes it very clear that anyone who is not Muslim, if you look in the Quran, but specifically Christians and very specifically Jewish people, is someone to be effectively annihilated. And you see that with, Hamas's opposition to Israel. And yet you've got the West Western left and leftists in Europe who are seemingly siding with this radical Islamic Jew hatred. What's it going to take for the Western left to actually realize what's going on here?
The Western left will never realize what's going on because they're embedded with them. Period. End of story. They're each other's allies. The Muslim Brotherhood, which are really the founders of radical Islam or Islamism, started by Hassan al-Banna in 1928 in Egypt, had this idea of the incremental encroachment into Western societies through social services and liberal causes, so to speak. And that's basically what it's done since 1948 in order to liberate Palestine. And that's how you can see the social changes throughout the world connected to these radical Islamic causes, very similarly to Qatar donating billions of dollars to universities, or the idea of intersectionality, where all these identities are intersecting, and then if they are not socially liberated and the Palestinians aren't socially liberated, then nobody is. When in reality, by the definition of intersectionality, the Jews pretty much have the cake on the intersectional identity. They will not wake up because they don't want to. And you can see that by the debate that's going on right now in the Dutch parliament. It's basically split. You have one side blaming the Jews, one side blaming the Arabs. Some people blaming Moroccan immigrants because apparently a number of the cab drivers were Moroccan, when typically Moroccans and Jews have gotten along very well. And very few people know that Mohammed V was actually a spy for the Mossad during the Casablanca conference before the Six-Day War. And Moroccans in general have always regretted how Jews had to leave Morocco, but a whole different topic. It's very clear that it's left versus right. It's pro-Jew, anti-Jew, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel. I think the things that are being suggested about certain behaviors of certain Israelis being inappropriate, justifying what we saw in the streets of Amsterdam, is the scariest thing of all, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're talking about maybe somebody burnt a flag or shoved somebody or wasn't quiet during a moment of silence. I'm not 100% sure about every single argument that's being made, but the justification is what we saw.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen or I have ever heard. And what we're going to continue to see throughout Europe is this exact argument. And I think it's very important to note that this will continue, and it will continue exactly in the way that we are seeing. And it will come down to one thing. Will Europe deport its terrorists and terrorist supporters, or will it not? And will countries decide to do this, or will they not? And it's going to have to come to a vote at some point, because the culture of Europe is teeter-tottering. And if they don't, I mean, Douglas Murray wrote about this in a number of his books and articles. I suggest anybody that's watching this to read Douglas, because he's fantastic and very much articulates on this subject of Europe. So it's very disappointing to see. And it's you know exactly who is supporting Israel, who is supporting the Jews, and who is not, just based on their political affiliation.
You do, and it is so, the hypocrisy of the left with all their talk about intersectionality is just staggering. It's like everyone except for Jewish people is somehow protected. It's really
it's just very clear that these people don't know anything about Jews.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about Jewish history. They don't understand where we come from or why we are in the place that we're in. And it's very clear. Their ignorance is very clear. There's really nothing much else to say other than that.
Oh, no, absolutely. And look, you mentioned deportations. Speaking of deportations, someone who's certainly not shy about deportations is Donald Trump. He is back in the White House, thank goodness. Now he has thank you God. Yes, thank God. Because he has a great track record as a peacetime president. He brokered a number of Middle Eastern peace deals during his first term.
He actually brokered more peace treaties than any sitting president in the history of the presidency.
Wow. That is amazing. Yes, he has great bona fides in that respect. So do you think that maybe a second Trump presidency can help bring an end to all the violence there?
No. No. I think that how do I explain this? Thank God that Trump is president. Thank God that the policy moving forward will be the foreign policy that he previously had put forward in his first term. Excellent. Okay. Fantastic win. You can see by his appointment of the UN ambassador, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and pretty much everybody else that he seems to be appointing, that not only is Donald Trump a friend of the Jews, but he's a friend to Israel.
Yeah.
And he is a friend to all those in need and all those whose lives are in danger because of radicalism, okay, which is very important. Donald Trump doesn't want to see anyone die anymore. And he's sick of the world's mass casualties that we've seen over the last 4 years. And I think that was made very, very clear during the campaign. And he blatantly said when he was being interviewed once, I just want people to stop dying. And I thought that was a very powerful thing that the news did not pick up on. Anti-Semitism is not going away. Anti-Zionism is not going away. Hatred of the Jewish people is not going away. So in my belief, if Israel is winding down some of the war that it's been fighting in Gaza and Lebanon, it'll be very interesting to see what happens outside of Israel's borders for Jews in general, because as we all know, they had to send helicopters to get people out of Amsterdam. So I think that the war for the Jewish people is going to turn into something more global. I think that we're going to see anti-Semitic occurrences and incidences all over the world, from, I guess you could say, from Sydney to Buenos Aires, from London to Shanghai, from Los Angeles to New York. I do feel that North America is teeter-tottering. I think that the most important thing is that governments can get together and deport as many of these terror supporters as possible, deport them if they're on student visas, deport them if they're here temporarily, deport them if they are citizens of their country and they are caught supporting terror organizations, because it's the same thing that was done with ISIS. And these organizations are no different than ISIS. And that's a very important thing that I don't think a lot of people understand. So if it was okay to deport these people for supporting ISIS, it should not be a problem for people to be deported for supporting Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas. It doesn't matter. Radical Islamic organizations are radical Islamic organizations, and they're irrational actors who behave irrationally. The only thing that you can expect from an irrational actor is irrational behavior. Period. End of story.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Very well said. It should not be, you should be deported if you support any kind of extremist ideology, not just ISIS. You've said it, absolutely hit the nail on the head. Adam, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk through this very sensitive and difficult topic. All the best, and we'll definitely have you back again soon.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, Daisy.